What's good, YouTube? We're talking college sports in the Deep South where college football is king. And on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Kennard Vernon Stewart here on the podcast today for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And we're talking about Auburn football like there is no tomorrow. As a matter of fact, speaking of tomorrow, there's about 2 months in between now and the Advocare Classic where Auburn will be taking on Pac-12 Oregon Ducks, who, as we've talked about before, has aspirations to not only get back into relevancy in the Pac-12, these jokers have the nerve to think that they are a playoff caliber team. And rightfully so. They have just come off a number 7 recruiting class. Probably would have been number 5 if Chris Musical Chairs Steele out of Florida, who flipped from Florida to Oregon now and flipped again to USC. We're doing this series of Auburn versus LSU 2019, what we think could be a pivotal game in the SEC coming into 2019. Both teams with obvious aspirations to do more this year. LSU coming off a very, very impressive 10-3 campaign. Auburn with a disappointing 8-5 campaign, coming dangerously close to 10 wins last year. I think if Auburn could have just managed to beat Tennessee and Mississippi State, the winnables. That's the thing Auburn has to do, is win the winnables. But either way, we got an ongoing series going on with previewing Auburn versus LSU. And the importance of that game, as we talked about it before, depends on the outcomes of games prior to, obviously. That's going to determine the heat index of this particular game that usually has high implications in the SEC West. This game is taking place a little bit later in the season than normal, as it's going to be October 26, 2019. Maybe under the lights in Baton Rouge, or one of those CBS games where we listen to Gary Danielson with the commentating. So here's the situation now. Both of these teams have to take trips to Texas early in the season. Auburn will be taking on the Oregon Ducks, obviously, as we talked about at the beginning of this particular podcast. And LSU will be taking the trip down to Austin, Texas, on the campus of the University of Texas to take on the Longhorns. Texas and Oregon, oddly enough, had similar seasons last year. You talk about the Oregon Ducks getting off to a pretty decent start, had the upset, well, not necessarily the upset, but had a very winnable game up in Stanford. If I remember watching that game, it appeared that Oregon all but had that particular game won. I was looking at it, Oregon's up 24-7 at halftime, and kind of just squandered that thing in the second half. Stanford pushed that thing into overtime, basically outscoring Oregon 31-7 to end that particular ball game. After Oregon got up 24-7, Stanford outscores Oregon 31-7 on their way to a huge victory over Oregon, and such a heartbreaking loss for the Oregon Ducks in that game. And then huge 2-week wins in a row with California beating them 42-24, then having a bye week and then going beating Washington in overtime at home. But after the huge win over Washington, losing bad the next couple of weeks, 34-20 to Washington State, 44-15 to Arizona. And the list goes on. And then if you look at the last 7 games for Oregon in 2018, basically 4-3 to end the season, but highlighted by a 3-game winning streak to end the season over Arizona State, Oregon State, and the bowl win in the Red Box Bowl against Michigan State. So you talk about a game of inches for Washington, having that win over Stanford, and just some bad ball play against Arizona and Utah. But then finishing off to finish last year's season 9-4, capping off a 3-game winning streak. Oregon has a lot of great expectations coming into this season. Troy Dye, the middle linebacker, will be returning. C.J. Verdell, the running back, also will be returning after an impressive campaign last year. And most notably, Justin Herbert, who could be a dark horse for the Heisman candidacy, returning at quarterback. Definitely going to test a very, very somewhat experienced Auburn team, but yet again, in some spots, Auburn definitely has some holes to fill. It's going to be an interesting matchup for the Auburn Tigers, as this is going to be a part of the games that determine how important this LSU game is going to be for the Tigers. Winning games like these, winning games like, say, Texas A&M, that little SEC stretch leading up to the Tiger Bowl. And then we look over to Texas. You know, Texas having a pretty decent season as well on last year. Had some opportunities really to push that whole Big 12 agenda. Starting off the season kind of disappointing. People like, we don't know about, Tom Herman and this Texas staff losing to Maryland 34-29. But after that, things started to really look up for Texas, beating Tulsa, USC, TCU, Kansas State, Oklahoma. And then the disappointing loss in October 27th to Oklahoma State, West Virginia. Those two crucial conference losses, similar to what Oregon had last year. I mean, losing those two games for Texas by less than 5 points combined, very disappointing. But similar to Oregon, going on a 3-game winning streak, losing to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, another entertaining ball game, and the game that has everyone just off the charts hyped down in Austin, Texas, the win over Georgia, 28-21 in the All-State Sugar Bowl. We look at Texas and Georgia. Texas actually going up 20-7 at halftime. Georgia trying to push that thing late in the fourth quarter, but just coming up short, 28-21, over 70,000 in attendance down in the New Orleans Superdome. Now, like I said before, I think these are two very important games for both LSU and Auburn. LSU taking on Texas, a very, very good football team. Texas has Sam Ehlinger coming back to lead this particular football team. And these two games are not going to necessarily determine the seasons for LSU and Auburn, but it's going to be very interesting how they perform in these particular games, because you win a game like this, not only does it give you confidence, it helps you during that stretch. Like I said, that confidence, that swagger. Both of these games are on the road, basically neutral site games for Auburn, and having to go on to the campus to take on Texas. It's going to be very interesting how this particular thing plays out for both LSU and Auburn, and that's going to lead up to both stretches for both teams and determine how the heat index is going to be for the Tiger Bowl in 2019. Let me know what you think about this video, guys. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. We're talking about Auburn versus LSU 2019. Ironically, both of these teams have to detour over to the state of Texas as the journey to the Tiger Bowl continues. Once again, here on this channel, where it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger, the SEC just means more. War Eagle.